the best of the week on Relevant Radio.
All right, this is Cale Clarke sitting in for Timmerie tonight on Trending. It's so good to be with you on the air this evening. I love today, July the 22nd, because it's the feast day of Saint Mary Magdalene, the apostle to the apostles. And I'm going to clear up some rumors about her. There's a lot of rumors, a lot of innuendo about her. And she's really the apostle to the apostles. And of course, today's gospel comes to us from the Gospel of John, how Mary discovers Jesus. She's the first to discover the risen Christ on Easter Sunday. And she has to tell the apostles that he is alive and he's coming to meet them. And they don't believe her. We know from the Gospels, all four Gospels tell us about Mary Magdalene. We do know that they did not believe her initially. Like, what kind of nonsense is this, essentially, is what they were getting at. And there's a reason for that. And it's kind of an unfortunate cultural reason from the times. And we do know this. The Catholic Church has been a huge champion of women and their legitimate rights all throughout the centuries, starting with defending the sanctity of marriage, that husbands need to be faithful to their wives and not leave them. Jesus, of course, was incredibly upset and cheesed about Pharisees who would divorce their wives for, quote unquote, any reason whatsoever. That was the norm in his day. And Mary Magdalene, when she came to the apostles, they didn't believe her. And you almost can't blame them in a certain sense because, and this is, by the way, one of the reasons why we know that the resurrection really happened, that the Gospels are telling the truth, that Jesus physically rose from the dead. Because if you were making up a story, if you were inventing a tale about a man coming back from the dead, you say he's the Messiah, you're trying to convince your fellow Jews that he is, well, guess what? You would not start with this, that women, including Mary Magdalene, were the first to discover the empty tomb and to start talking about this. You would never make up an account. Oh yeah, Jesus physically rose from the dead, and the first people to encounter him alive are women. If you're inventing the story, you would have Peter be the guy who meets Jesus first, or John, but not Mary Magdalene, especially with her reputation, if you will. There's always been chatter throughout the centuries that Mary Magdalene was a prostitute. There's actually no evidence for that in the text. There's no evidence whatsoever. People want to conflate her with the sinful woman who washes Jesus' feet with her tears and dries them with her hair. And Augustine, what was the first person in the 4th century to say, oh yeah, this was Mary Magdalene. There's no evidence it was actually her. But we do know this. In Mark's gospel, it says that Jesus cast out 7 demons from her. And so that's pretty bad. That's pretty bad. Obviously, we know that 7 in the Bible is the number of completeness or wholeness. So she basically was full of demons. And there's sort of an aspect of vengeance there as well. Whenever you have 7 in the Bible, sometimes it's connected with vengeance. In the book of Genesis, God says, hey, if anyone hurts Cain, I will avenge him 7-fold. You know, the 7-fold vengeance. So whatever this is, it's pretty bad. And Jesus frees her from these demons. We do know that this happened, by the way, in all likelihood, in the town of Magdala when Jesus was kind of on his preaching tour, his whirlwind preaching tour through the Galilee, visiting all the synagogues in the countryside. She was one of the people who supported Jesus and the apostles out of her own pocket in their missionary journeys. So she was a woman of means somehow. And of course, Jesus had done her this tremendous service of casting 7 demons out of her. He probably met her at the synagogue in Magdala. Some people think that she was Jesus's wife. Why do people think this? Well, there are a lot of reasons why, but I will say that a lot of this nonsense in sort of recent times started with the publication on March the 18th, 2003 of a really, really bad novel called The Da Vinci Code, written by Dan Brown. And a lot of people think it's good literature, folks. It's not. You need to read some more books if you think that. And of course, it became a sort of a movie franchise with Tom Hanks starring as Robert Langdon, a symbologist. The beginning of the book, he has this page, and right at the top, it just says facts. And then he lists all these things that are allegedly facts. One of them is that Jesus was married and had a kid. Well, all the facts are not true. Every single one of them is false. But people don't know that because they never learned it growing up. They never had a formal religious education. There's so much anti-Catholicism out there in the culture. There's lots of reasons why people were buying into this, but a lot of people think it was meant to be pure history. It is absolutely not. Back in 1982, these two guys, Michael Bagent, well, actually there were three guys, Michael Bagent, Richard Lee, and Henry Lincoln. They wrote a book called Holy Blood and Holy Grail. I don't know if you remember this. This is really a big deal back in the 1980s. And they used to kind of say, hey, we've done really careful, crucial historical research on this topic, and we have uncovered a truth that the church did not want you to know. They've tried to bury it. Well, we are going to uncover it here. And the quote unquote truth that they want to tell us is that Jesus and Mary Magdalene were lovers. They had children. And in fact, the descendants of these children actually got all the way to southern France and became part of the nobility. And in fact, from their stock, if you will, came the line of the famous French Merovingians, the French Merovingians. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but at any rate. Have you ever heard of the Knights Templar? You probably have. The Knights Templar and the Priory of Sion, a secret society which was founded back in 1099. Okay. Whew, that was a long time ago. Apparently the Knights Templar and the Priory of Sion knew all of this, and they did everything in their power to keep this under wraps, because if the truth ever got out, man, this would be bad news for the Catholic Church. Plus, we need to protect the physical descendants of Jesus and Mary Magdalene. People knew who they were. They would be hunting them down. They'd want to interview them. Life wouldn't be comfortable for them. Maybe they want to just kind of live their life in quiet and luxury. I don't know. All right, so you might be asking the question, how on earth did Michael Bagent, Richard Lee, and Henry Lincoln discover all of this? How did they find out that this was allegedly true? Well, hidden away in a secret room in the Bibliothèque Nationale of France, the National Library of France, they found in a drawer somewhere some of the Priory of Sion's secret papers that talk about this. And they also claim to have found important clues in artwork, legends. Now, I want to say this right now. There isn't a credible historian in the world who believes any of this stuff. And for very good reason, because none of it is true. The entire thing is a hoax. The entire thing is absolutely a hoax. And how do we know that? Well, the people who actually created the hoax, they've admitted it. They actually came out and said, we were lying. Michael Bagent was informed that this was a hoax before he even published the book, Holy Blood and Holy Grail. But he went ahead and published it anyways because he knew it was going to probably sell a lot of copies, so he didn't let the truth get in the way of that. Well, the hoax began way back in 1956. There were all kinds of rumors of treasure, valuable papers that were found at Rennes-le-Château. And there's a guy named Pierre Plantard, along with some of his friends, and he kind of exploited this rumor, and he created this full-blown story, this hoax with French and Latin fake documents relating to the Priory of Sion. Well, it turns out that's not even a real thing. It never existed. And he planted all of these fake documents in the National Library of France. And you can go on the internet, you can find scanned documents of these fake papers that they created. Anyways, so the guys who started this hoax eventually admitted under oath in a French court of law that they made the whole thing up. Pierre Plantard served time in prison. He went to jail for fraud, and he actually died in the year 2000, 3 years before the Da Vinci Code came out. Anyway, there's been books written about this. What you really need to know is that Michael Bagent, Richard Lee, and Henry Lincoln were kind of building on this hoax. They knew it was a hoax, and they gave people a fake history in their book, Holy Blood, Holy Grail. But a lot of people believed what they wrote. They thought it was real. And one of the people that thought it was real was Dan Brown. Dan Brown, of course, wrote the Da Vinci Code. And the Da Vinci Code accepts every single thing that Bagent, Richard Lee, and Henry Lincoln wrote about in Holy Blood, Holy Grail. The Da Vinci Code just swallows it all, hook, line, and sinker. And in fact, the guys who wrote Holy Blood and Holy Grail sued Dan Brown and his publisher for stealing their intellectual property, even though the whole thing was a hoax. They say, hey, you can't steal our fake story about Jesus and Mary Magdalene and their descendants. Anyways, there are just legions of errors in the Da Vinci Code. But let's talk right now about this one particular lie that's of great interest to us. Da Vinci's portrait of the Last Supper. Of course, the book is called the Da Vinci Code, right? Da Vinci painted this in 1497. That's a very famous painting. I'm sure you can all imagine it in your mind's eye. And when you look at the painting, The Last Supper by Leonardo da Vinci, there's a man. Well, is it a man? There's a figure to the right of Jesus who has no beard. Everybody else has a beard, has a full head of long, beautiful. I mean, they've really got some flow. It's not really a mullet. It's longer than that. It's just a really nice head of hair. And this person, whoever it may be, is leaning against Jesus' heart. And of course, Dan Brown wants to say, it's none other than Mary Magdalene. Well, art historians say no. My friend, Father Eric Nicolai, who is an actual legit art historian, and he says absolutely not, along with every other legit art historian on the planet. It's not Mary Magdalene. The person in the painting is the beloved disciple. In other words, John the Apostle, the author in all likelihood of the Gospel of John. Now, in Leonardo da Vinci's time, young men used to be portrayed in art in this way, with no beard, long hair. That's just how you would paint a young man. For some examples of this, by the way, you can do a Google image search. Da Vinci also had another painting called John the Baptist, which he painted somewhere between 1513 and 1516. Same kind of look, no beard, long hair. Raphael, the famous artist Raphael, he's not the Ninja Turtle. Raphael painted a portrait of Saint Sebastian somewhere between 1502 or 1503. Same thing, long hair, no beard. We could go on and on and on. Andrea del Verrocchio's famous painting, Tobias and the Angel, about the Book of Tobit, that was painted between 1470 and 1480. It's the same kind of thing. Long hair, no beard. That's how you would paint a youthful man. It's not a young woman, okay? So that's what's going on here. It is John the Apostle in the Da Vinci painting. It's not Mary Magdalene. Okay, so we've solved that mystery. But where do people get this idea that Mary Magdalene and Jesus had a romantic relationship? There is nothing in the Bible about this. There is certainly nothing in church history about this. The only places where anybody could possibly come up with any idea that this was the case was from a couple of what are called the non-biblical gospels or the non-canonical gospels. There are gospels that were not in the Bible. They didn't make it into the Bible for very good reason, by the way. And they don't contain any legit historical information about Jesus and his life. They're not written in the first century when Jesus lived. Unlike the four gospels in the New Testament, they are not authoritative, legit biographical sources of information about Jesus. They're written by quasi-Christian cults and sects like the Gnostics. Okay, they are groups that split off from the Catholic Church. They had all kinds of esoteric beliefs. And the Gnostics were a group, they believed they had secret knowledge. And that's what the word Gnostic means. Gnosis, it comes from the Greek word gnosis, which means knowledge. They basically said, hey, if you really want the inside scoop about Jesus, forget about the Catholic Church. You got to join our little group because only we know the secret. We've got the secret knowledge, but we're only going to tell you if you come with us. And they would produce these false gospels, such as the Gospel of Philip and the Gospel of Mary. Now, this Mary, in this case, is Mary Magdalene.
Like what you just heard? Share it with your family and friends. And thanks for listening.